This program is made possible by funding from the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, where government leaders, business executives, and academic experts come together to discuss major issues facing the state of Florida.
This morning's event focuses on how we leverage our investment in rail transit through the land uses that are surrounding these transit stations. The introduction of SunRail and high-speed rail has certainly been a defining moment for our region. Some people said, great, we got that done, check that off the list, but many of us know that really we're just getting started, that there's a lot of work to do. Certainly those events were not the result of happenstance. It's a lot of hard work by a lot of people making that happen, including some of you here. So rail here in Central Florida is a great achievement. It's a cause for celebration, but we can't lose sight of the real prize, which is how does this contribute to our economic prosperity, and a piece of that, a large piece of that, will come out of how we use these stations to connect areas of economic activity and the kinds of economic activities that we can concentrate around these stations and create a legacy for generations. ULI has been engaged in a community dialogue with our community partners and stakeholders around the transportation land use intersection. Today's gathering is the third in a series, and we know this is a continuing dialogue. We want to focus on how we really support making this happen in the right way and achieving results for our region. Our experience with transit in other parts of the country has taught us that advanced planning and understanding of the market and understanding of the kinds of incentives and requirements that are necessary to make this happen right around these stations is very important, that communities need to figure out how they're going to really accomplish their vision for what they'd like to have around these stations. It's more than just getting the design parameters from FDOT and moving on. But when it's done right, we know that it has a real impact on communities. Just from a property value perspective, going back and looking at what's happened around other station areas, we see anywhere from a 5 to 45% or more increase in property values when the transit is first announced, when the stations actually open, as the system expands. Those are all opportunities to add value. It's not easy realizing those increases in value. There's a lot of challenges. Often there are multiple property owners around these station areas that have different interests. The acquisition of those properties around the stations can be challenging. The cost of integrating structured parking is expensive, particularly when you're putting something in a suburban environment. There are very significant and expensive infrastructure requirements. There may be local opposition to developing at the kinds of densities that are needed to make transit-oriented development work. So overcoming these complicated and often controversial challenges requires an ongoing collaboration between the public and private sectors. This morning we're going to continue the dialogue on how that will work here in Central Florida. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Diane Trees with the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, who will introduce today's moderator and our distinguished panel. Diane.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Diane Trees. As director of the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, I'm very proud to be one of today's sponsors. Recognizing the important role that a metropolitan research university has in the community, the Metro Center focuses its efforts on economic issues of relevance across the Central Florida region. Our programs are educational tools. We bring together experts like the ones we have today who present and discuss trends, research, and relevant business practices. Also sponsoring today's event is VHB Miller Sellon, a team of visionary engineers, planners, and designers who share the same passion, which is intelligent solutions for growth with respect to the natural environment. At VHB Miller-Sellen, sustainability is not just a concept, it's a commitment. A commitment to clients today, to continue for the work for our children and for generations to come. Thank you to VHB Miller-Sellen and for the UCF Metro Center for sponsoring this event and continuing support for ULI. The program today deals with the specifics of station area planning, design, and development looking at Seminole County. I'd like to bring up our panelists one at a time now, and then we'll turn the program over for our moderator and we'll proceed from there. Our first panelist is the Honorable Bob Dilawri. Commissioner Dilawri serves as chair of the Seminole County Board of Commissioners. He was elected to the commission in 2004 and subsequently re-elected in 2008. He holds various board positions, and among those are with the Metro Orlando EDC and Metro Plan Orlando. Commissioner. Dr. Kim Delaney. Dr. Delaney serves as Growth Management Coordinator for the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. This state agency spans a 4-county region from Palm Beach County north to Indian River County. She is responsible for improving linkages between land use and transportation. Dr. Delaney. Mr. Eric Hill. Mr. Hill is the Director of Systems Management at Metro Plan Orlando. He's responsible for promoting the development of efficiencies in the transportation network in the Metro Plan area, which includes Orange, Seminole, and Osceola counties. Mr. Hill. Mr. Philip Lorian. Mr. Lorian serves as Executive Director of the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. His responsibilities include planning for regional issues such as water, the environment, transportation, school concurrency, and affordable housing, while acknowledging each community's autonomy in land use decisions. Mr. Lorian. The Honorable David Mueller. Dr. Mueller serves as mayor of the city of Lake Mary, and he is also a professor and associate vice president for regional campuses at the University of Central Florida. He's active in a variety of political, educational, and community activities, having previously served in the Florida House of Representatives for District 34. Dr. Mueller. And our moderator today is Mr. Michael J. Carragher. Mr. Carragher serves as the Southeast Regional Manager for VHB Miller-Sellen. He brings 26 years of experience, most recently as VHB's National Leader for Transportation Infrastructure. He's worked on some of the nation's most complex rail and transit systems, including Boston, Washington, D.C., and New York City. Please welcome Mr. Carragher.
Thank you, everyone, and good morning. You know, a lot of people walked in this morning kind of bleary-eyed. It's early, getting their coffee. But how could you not be jacked to talk about urban transit and transit-oriented development? I mean, this is no longer, you know, something we're talking about here in Central Florida. This is really happening. Dirt's going to be turning after the first of the year on the SunRail project. And with the combination of the funding and the moving forward of SunRail, and then, you know, earlier this year, the awarding of just a down payment of $1.25 billion for high-speed rail, Orlando is on the map. Central Florida is on the map, and the rest of the country are looking at what's going to happen right here, because this is where we have the great opportunity to bring urban transit, compact development, livable communities, learn from all the lessons around the country, and put that Orlando flair to it, and really make this a great success. So this is a great time to be here. We have a great topic to talk about today. And like I said, it is no longer if or how or when. You're going to hear today from this august group of panelists what is really happening, okay? So that we can move forward and start creating and building, not planning, but really start building and implementing all the ideas that we've been talking about here, and make compact urban development and great places to live, work, learn, play around these nodes throughout the area. They're going to be growing and starting with the SunRail stations over the next few years. So it's time to move forward and make these things happen and not just talk about what we've been planning and what we're thinking about and what do we see. So, you know, the reason I get so excited about this, I've had a great opportunity and been really fortunate through my career to work on the planning, design, implementation, and even lived in some of the great areas where TODs have really taken off, in Philadelphia, in Boston, in New York City, in Washington, in Dallas. You're seeing some things happen in Richmond, in the Charlotte area. You know, like I said, it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. And you're going to see not just people locally moving in and around and businesses in and around these stations. You're going to be seeing other people make relocation decisions about where they want to be, looking for that lifestyle, especially, you know, kind of the next generation of people coming out of colleges and universities. They're going to want to be where these urban transit systems are working and are new and are vibrant. So there's a lot of great reasons to see this succeed. And a lot of great groundwork has already been done, and that's what we need to kind of move forward and listen to our panelists today. So the format for today's program is each of our panelists is going to share kind of 5 to 8 minutes, you know, about, and we're going to start kind of out at that regional level at what's happening, and then bring some lessons learned from the Treasure Coast and what's been happening around the Tri-Rail stations, and then kind of get down into some of the nitty-gritty of how we're going to be connecting these stations, and then kind of focus in on one station, Lake Mary. So we're going to kind of take it from a broad perspective and bring it down to one specific station. After everyone has their opportunity to kind of share their thoughts and perspectives with you, we'll be looking for you, you know, now that you've had your coffee, you're talking about a great fun subject, to ask some great questions and engage with our panelists. So with that, let's move forward and start with Commissioner DeLauria.
Thank you, Michael. And I appreciate everyone being here, as well as allowing me to speak in front of you. Transit development, as well as the word density, in the general public, as we all know, there are a lot of issues with it, mainly because of the words. A lot of people don't understand it. So we took a stance, Seminole County, back in the around 2001. We knew it was coming. The reason why we knew it was coming is because, you know, rail tried to get here in the mid-90s, and for one reason or another it failed. So we took a different perspective back in the early days and says, okay, government really has, one reason or another, a poor track record with the general public. People a lot of times don't believe what we say we're going to do, we're going to implement. And people change, and it doesn't really come to the forefront. So we took a position, let's take Seminole County, and let's preserve a third of the county. It's called the rural area. It's up there on the map. That was done in 2002. It's done, it's over, it's protected. We don't want very little development there. The black hammocks there, those who live in this area, Chilliota and Geneva. Then you go to the western side of the county, called the Wekiva River. Another jewel, not just of Seminole County, but Central Florida. Well, the state has the Wekiva Protection Area. That's almost about an eighth of the county. So you can see the two bookends. We want density in between. So we actually did what we said we were going to do to the public. We preserved a large portion of the county. Now we want that density. We like density. So how can we get density in some key corridors? Our two key corridors is the 1792 corridor, and you can see that orange line. You see the SunRail stations just to the right of it. That's 1792. In this area, we've already administratively, about 3 years ago, put density in there. So a property owner has entitlements today that they can pull the trigger anytime in the future, administratively. They do not have to come in front of the board, and they can get quite a bit of density. We want 6 to 8 to 10-story buildings in various key locations. The reason why we're doing it administratively is, number one, if a developer wants to come in, they can actually purchase the property under its existing land use, pay the existing taxes, and then when they're ready to actually pull their building permit, administratively push the button. So they don't have to have that burden for all these years of planning of those increased taxes. That to us is one of the big jewels that's already been planned, it's already done. A lot of people that I hear when we had the pre-meeting, Mike, we talked about, is this really going to happen? Well, 1792, It is done. It's ready for transit development. We also, in the same corridor, have an energy conservation corridor. You give us buildings that have geared towards energy conservation, we'll give you more density. We also have in this same corridor, in this same area where the SunRail is, as well as 1792, a transit corridor. You give us transit-oriented development with increased mobility. Not only do you have to follow concurrency for traffic, because that's already been taken care of, we'll actually give you more density. We're looking at SunRail, and you can see the 4 stops here in Seminole County, Sanford, Lake Mary, Longwood, and Altamont, as microeconomic engines for Seminole County. Most of all the heavy lifting has been done. Now what we're doing over the past year and year to come is tweaking what needs to be done to get the community more, as Mike would say, jacked up for transit development. If we're going to survive in Central Florida, we have to have density. We have to have growth. And that's what we're not gearing towards, but that's what we've done. And I think in moving forward, the next step for our county is developing partnerships. Not just with the cities. We have 7 cities in Seminole County. We have 4 train stations. You're going to hear from the mayor of Lake Mary. We have a great relationship with all our cities. But how can we partner with the cities? We're actually forming a thing called, and I know you folks know all about this stuff, it's called CRAs, Community Redevelopment Agencies. Keeping the tax money in those key areas to generate growth, to bring in infrastructure, so we can all have a win-win situation. And you'll hear from the mayor today about where their city's going. With the 4 stops we have Sanford, Lake Mary, Longwood, and Altamont. Even though it has 4 cities, there's really 3. The Altamont station is really in the county. We're hoping someday that they'll actually literally annex it. Not that we want them get rid of the property, but we feel that it should have that city's entitlement, that city's brand. The thing that we've also done with SunRail, our infrastructure for SunRail is fully paid for. We're one of the few communities that have done that. We're not asking any of the cities to contribute the cost of the initial payment and construction of SunRail. That has been established by the board several years ago and is sitting in an account. We're ready to write that check, and we've been writing portions of that check. We're going to be responsible for the rail, the platform, and the parking. Any of the increased amenities that the cities want, we're hoping that we form CRAs so that we can actually have a win-win situation with the cities. It's important that we look forward. It's important that we try to have different partnerships. And I believe that the model that we're doing is being copied in different areas. The other thing that we did is, for those that live in the area, how shall we grow at myregion.org? I believe it's 97 different communities were involved in this. We adopted how shall we grow in our comp plan, in our land development code. We fully embraced it. About 60% of the communities here in Central Florida have done that. I'm hoping that the other 40% will embrace it in the future. These are the things that I think will stir development, stir excitement. People do want growth. People do want density, but they want to be able to trust their local governments that they're actually going to have that balance. And that's what we're trying to do here. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Commissioner DeLaurie made a great point talking about the investment that has already been paid for, from the federal, the state, the county, and the municipal levels throughout here. And it's our opportunity now, and it's our challenge and responsibility to make sure we leverage great success from that investment that's already being paid. And as we look forward and we look at what is happening in and around all of these stations, Mr. DeLaurie and the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council have been doing a great job kind of working on how to work and assist each of the communities to have themselves prepared so that we can start moving forward. With that, Mr. DeLaurie.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning. Can I ask, in the audience, how many of you are public sector planners? Okay. How about private consultant planners? Okay. How about real estate developers? And of the developers that have raised their hand, how many of you have already invested in transit-oriented development land here or somewhere else? Okay, just a few. Interesting. Mike asked us the question to sort of answer in our 5-minute talk, you know, what is your organization doing to get ready for transit in the region? So I wanted to talk about two things briefly in my little 5 minutes. One is the Strategic Regional Policy Plan, and the second one is a HUD grant that we're pursuing, and we hope have some hope that we'll get it. The first piece, following on Commissioner Delary, he talked about the regional vision, How Should We Grow, from 2007. That really is the driving force in the 2060 regional policy plan that we're working on right now. Every 10 years, by state law, all 11 regional planning councils in the state of Florida have to have what's called a strategic regional policy plan. Those are typically a 10-year window in time, and a 10-year window is not adequate to obviously see the fruits or the bad results of your labors within 10 years. One of the benefits of the How Should We Grow project was that we took a 50-year snapshot. We used very state-of-the-art modeling to look at what's the trend if we keep growing the way we're growing, and then what could be some alternative scenarios. And many of you are probably familiar with those different scenarios. But basically, with 20,000 people that were involved in that process, and 40,000 more who tuned in primetime TV to watch, and 3,000 of whom were actually involved hands-on in participatory workshops, what we heard very clearly from the regional vision is we don't want the trend. We want to grow in a more compact fashion. We want to have transit-oriented corridors with mixed-use development that connect centers, and by doing so, conserve our countryside. And so those elements are now starting to trickle into this 50-year policy plan that we're doing that we call the East Central Florida 2060 plan. It's the first time that I'm aware of that anybody has tried to exceed the 10-year horizon, but we think the benefits of it outweigh the difficulties of doing it. By looking 50 years out, we really have been able to anticipate using computer modeling that we'll get bad results if we keep growing in this low-density, auto-oriented sprawl. So the policy plan, the highlights of the policy plan with relationship to transit is we have the unique ability as regional planning councils. Why the legislature gave this power to us, I can only surmise because we overlap metropolitan planning organizations, but they gave the regional planning councils the unique authority to recommend minimum densities in corridors planned for public transit. So we're going to invoke that in the policy plan. And the key word is recommend. We don't have any power to require. But by recommending, we hope that the local communities will do as Seminole County is doing, and that is say, we want to see minimum densities at the time when it's appropriate for the development community to pull the trigger on lands that we have already set aside as appropriate for higher intensities in transit-served corridors. So the policy plan has no power. I mean, the regional planning councils only have the power of good ideas. But every 7 years, every one of the 74 communities in our 6-county region has to go through what's called an EAR, or an evaluation appraisal report process. And when they do, they have to read the most recent policy plan, and they have to then comport. I didn't use the word conform, but they have to comport to that policy plan. They have to ask themselves, do we generally comport, and how can we tailor ourselves? Each one of these being individual sovereign communities, they have the discretion to say, how do we tailor ourselves and make that fit? So the policy plan is a collaborative effort. There were 285 stakeholders that helped us derive the policies. We've had 385 comments on those policies. We're now working our way through them. And sometime in the next 6 months, we expect to be transmitting to DCA a final draft of that. With regard to transit, the hallmarks are going to be the recommendation of minimum densities in corridors that have been established as public transit corridors by the MPOs in our region. We're promoting transit-oriented development. Design is going to be critical to that. So for those folks who have been developing the typical suburban style design with separation of uses, now it's a new dimension. We're going to be talking about mixed uses, much higher intensities, multi-story buildings, closer to the street, and we also are going to need at the same time an increase in floor area ratios in local development codes and a reduction in off-street parking. So as a guideline, we're saying in the policy plan, consider abolishing your off-street parking requirements in those corridors served by transit, or at a minimum, think about cutting the requirements in half, because excessive suburban parking requirements for off-street parking isn't going to work in the transit corridors. So from a regional perspective, the policy plan is very highly directed towards transit-oriented development. And when we actually did the scenario for the alternative future and allocated population, 400,000 people are allocated to the transit corridors. Makes a huge difference. So instead of sending 400,000 people out into more suburban development at the edge, we're bringing them back into existing corridors and centers. The second piece that we're working on, we have filed an application on August the 23rd for a HUD grant, a HUD Sustainable Community Planning Grant. And the whole theme of this was redesigning a super region for sustainable development and transit-oriented development. And we linked up the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council with the Central Florida Regional Planning Council, and then we had a collaborative partnership even with Tampa Bay. The whole idea was to talk about getting ready for high-speed rail and SunRail, and we asked for $5 million, which is the maximum amount. The money would be spent on station area planning where it's needed. And some stops are more ready than others. One of the first things that we did, and we did this for Metroplan at their request, was to do an inventory of the future land use maps and land development regulations for all 17 of the SunRail stops, and identify which ones seem to be completely ready, which ones are partially ready, and which ones aren't ready at all. And then we allocated a budget to actually say so much money for each to distribute that $5 million, and there's also money in there for some high-speed rail area, station area planning as well. I think that's probably my 5 minutes, but that's what we're doing at the Regional Planning Council. And as I say, we have no power but the power of good ideas, but we do have influence. So what I'm trying to do today is cultivate a little influence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think that that influence is something all of us need to take hold of. You know, a lot of us in the room are going to be the ones responsible for painting on this blank palette that we have of creating these new urban compact areas around the transit stations. And we need to kind of think beyond what we're used to doing here. And like I said, build on the lessons learned, you know, from across the state and across the nation, and put the Orlando and Central Florida signature on it. One of the people that we've invited today to talk about some lessons learned come right here from in Florida with regards to what's been happening around the tri-rail stations. And with that, Dr. Delaney, would you like to join us?
Thank you for the opportunity to come up to Orlando. It's one of my favorite cities to visit because it functions like a real city, which is just a pleasure to be able to walk from your hotel to your destination in the morning. Greg called me and asked me to give you some observations on the tri-rail experience as I've titled this so far. And immediately what I said to Greg was, well, gosh, you know, I wish I had a lot of before and afters. I have a lot of befores, but I don't have a whole lot of afters yet. And he actually said that was perhaps some good lesson learning for the SunRail part of the state. And so I have for you kind of a collection of images today. I've been with the region for 6.5 years. I started when my 7-year-old was 6 months old. I'm amazed that we don't have more ground that's been broken by now. What you'll have to bear with me, I'm an eternal optimist, and I work for the Regional Planning Council, so I have to be optimistic. It will be better 20 years out, absolutely. So don't be depressed by the images, but hopefully what they can help convey is maybe a little pitfall avoidance, which is one of the things that we try to do anyway at the Regional Planning Council and in life generally. So with that, a little overview for you. Let's see if I can. Left button would be the other left. Okay, so a typical commuter trip in South Florida kind of looks like this. I-95, of course, is the most dangerous roadway in the U.S., and this is throughout the 3-county portion of the state, not just my region, which includes the Palm Beach County portion of the Tri-Rail corridor, but also in Miami-Dade and Broward, which is actually in the South Florida RPC. And of course, the roadway forecast is pretty bleak. The Secretary of DOT District 4 will tell you has about 25% of the money to build 100% of the roadway needs. The population forecast is, I think it's 85% over 20 years, and there's enough funding to build, the roadway capacity will increase by maybe 40 45%. So if it's crowded today, the lesson is it'll be more crowded down the road. And of course, many of you have seen this image, I'm sure. The Interstate Improvement Program kind of looks like this. In fact, we just finished adding 2 lanes on portions of I-95, and they were immediately filled the day they opened. And it's interesting. I was just finishing one of Friedman's books, and that was the same observation he had. And overpasses and roadways built all over the country and world, they're filled immediately upon the day they're opening. In the state, I think the timing is just tremendous to look at TOD and transit. In fact, when I put this map together, our friends, our partners at DOT, asked for a copy. This is a more complete illustration of all the different transit opportunities, rail opportunities happening around the state, and they're different flavors. There's certainly plenty of activity happening in the downtowns that have urban circulators, but commuter rail, high-speed rail, intercity passenger rail, which is what Amtrak runs. Certainly the timing is never better, and it's a competitive environment. So if Florida's going to bring our own tax dollars home to pay for some of this stuff, we really have a lot of work to do. So we've spent a lot of time looking around the country at what seems to be working. The Tri-Rail system, by the way, is a 72-mile system that runs on the CSX tracks, has 18 stations and 72 miles. It was built as the reliever to I-95 when I-95 was going under construction. So it's about 20 years old, carries about 15,000 people a day. It was carrying about 17,000 a day when gas hit $4 a gallon. In fact, it was the fastest growing commuter railroad in the United States, which was remarkable. And one of my friends is the deputy director, and he often tells me that with as woeful a system as Tri-Rail runs, as criticized as it is, it still gains riders every single year. And that was the case, peaking with the $4 a gallon gas a few years ago. Now it seems to be settling about 15.5 or so on a daily basis. That represents about a lane of traffic in each direction on I-95. There's a lot of TOD activity taking place. This is an illustration of some of the TODs that we've either participated in as kind of the planning facilitator or helped the RTA, which is the Regional Transportation Authority, review those plans. I should mention that the Tri-Rail system's actually been absorbed into a larger transportation study happening down in southeast Florida, and that's the South Florida East Coast Corridor Study, or SFECC study. And there's a website, sfeccstudy.com, if you're sleepy. There are thousands and thousands of pages of documents. Pardon me. What this project proposes is not only to include the existing Tri-Rail system, but expand Tri-Rail system north into northern Palm Beach County and add passenger rail service on the FEC corridor, which is the other track. And this image, which for some reason, well, it's going to go forward in just a moment, I'm sure. I'm having a little trouble. There we go. I'll just manually. There we go. So from an aerial perspective, just to give you an idea of how this part of the state looks, the CSX runs west of I-95, and the FEC tracks tend to be east of I-95. The Tri-Rail corridor, the CSX tracks, have a couple of places where they skirt to the east of I-95 as they get further to the north. Now, when Tri-Rail was built, the corridor everybody wanted was the FEC, because that actually goes through all the downtowns, and that's where people work and live and shop, and there's a whole lot of traffic, certainly east of I-95, but it wasn't available. So what the state did was secure the CSX track and actually acquire it from the CSX. It's now the South Florida Rail Corridor, and there's a series of interconnections that will be constructed in between these two tracks. Long term, the goal is there'd be different types of trains running on both tracks, interconnecting back and forth between the tracks, and the forecasts are that the long-term build-out of this system will carry somewhere in the neighborhood of somewhere between 80 and about 110,000 people a day. So a huge amount of volume being carried on this kind of multi-dimensional transit system. TOD planning along the Tri-Rail corridor. Well, you all, of course, are very familiar with the definition of TOD, walkable villages ideally, structuring parking to make a pedestrian-friendly environment, and we know that every transit trip starts and stops as a pedestrian. So the better job we can do with the pedestrian feel of whatever type of transit station it is, the more successful we'll be. And we often use slides that look at transit-oriented development versus transit-adjacent development, the evil twin. Unfortunately, most of what we have on the Tri-Rail corridor is transit-adjacent development. It's a track that does not have a lot of TOD, you know, even though there's been a T there for 20 years. For the most part, the Tri-Rail corridor has industrial uses, warehouse distribution, mobile home parks, and some multifamily, but it's often very conveniently walled entirely so that you could never get from your unit in a multifamily project to the train station. It would take you like a 3-mile walk to get to the train station that's maybe half a mile away. And we often use, in fact, Winter Park to illustrate transit-oriented development. Pardon me. Here's a great setup. Here's the Amtrak station, future SunRail station. There's the line of pedestrian-friendly urban frontage with a mix of uses and an active ground floor, structured parking, and it's a convenient walk from the station to there. Whenever I come into Winter Park, I see people wheeling their suitcase from the station to go to the Park Plaza Hotel. TAD, unfortunately, the evil twin, well, this is the Pompano Beach Tri-Rail station. There's the station, and it's pretty well separated from everything around it. The future proposed development at this site is to improve the parking lot, unfortunately, and there it stands. And so there's your example of TAD. You all are familiar with the TOD typology. There's different types of stations. There's not a one-size-fits-all. All the Tri-Rail stations are what are termed local parking rides, essentially. That's their function. They all have between 200 and 600 parking spaces, but otherwise they're really designed to collect people and put them on the system. They really don't exist today as destinations because there's just nothing around them. And so there's the rest of the typology, which you all are familiar with, I'm sure. I have a couple of stations to kind of just show you as by way of example. One is in the city of Lake Worth. Lake Worth is a very urban city in Palm Beach County. Population's about 36,000. The Regional Planning Council was asked to conduct a planning charrette in Lake Worth to look at not only the existing Tri-Rail station, but also future stations along the FEC, part of that SFECC study. So we did that. We came up with a plan for the Tri-Rail station, and we located 2 stations along the FEC in the future. Focusing just on the Tri-Rail station, this is the existing condition. Is this illustrating up here? There you go. So there's the Tri-Rail station lives just west of I-95. This roadway that is just north of the station is Lake Worth Road. It does not have I-95 access, so it's a little tough to get to this station. I-95 access is one exit to the north or one exit to the south. And beautiful downtown Lake Worth exists due east. You can really walk there from the station if it was comfortable. Kind of zooming in to give you an idea of what that station looks like. Here's I-95, parking conveniently located below I-95. The station itself, this is a mobile home park that has been on the market now for several years. Here's the parking for the Tri-Rail station, which is about 80 spaces, and then there's single-family residential to the west. Across the street is a strip, kind of a large strip shopping center. It's a public shopping center that is a low-performing facility, but the folks that own it just aren't interested in changing it because they're still making rents. They're still making their payments. So here's our condition. We developed a great infill program where that existing mobile home park, which has 42 units, can actually become 250 residential units, a mix of multifamily and single family, kind of tapering down to these lakefront views that exist at the southern end of that site, and add a little bit of retail up here at the corner. Kind of zooming in on that site, that's the profile, a good urban design with good pedestrian character. Parking is structured, of course. Some images of what that station can look like. The status is that the city and the CRA working together adopted the charrette plan, amended the comp plan, amended the land development regulations, and then the market went south. We finished the work about 2 years ago, and they're ready. They're primed, but there's no activity yet. So there's a lot of enthusiasm, but we're on hold. In Delray Beach, kind of a similar situation. In this case, the county led the planning effort. Pardon me. Here's the Delray Beach station just west of I-95. It's actually on property owned by Palm Beach County. So one of the lessons learned for you, if I can offer those, is where the public sector is the owner, it's often much more difficult than when there's the private sector as the owner because there's not a normal profit motivation. So when the public sector owns the property, what we have found in many of these locations is that you just hit a quagmire, and the public agency doesn't want to let the land go because they don't know when they'll get funding again to buy another piece to do whatever was planned there to begin with. Here's one of the cases in Delray Beach. The land is sat for 18 years with no plan. The county, I'm going to zoom in for you. There's an example of how that station looks. Here's the Tri-Rail station, again, just west of I-95. The Tri-Rail parking lot exists immediately to the west, and then this kind of fried egg, if you will, is the county administration building that is scheduled for redevelopment. The county brought in a planning firm to do a plan to kind of understand what could happen on this site. The site could easily accommodate another 200-300 residential units, maybe 20, 30, 40,000 feet of office, and the county's long-term development needs for this site to add another almost 100,000 feet of public office space. But unfortunately, the project was gotten ready. It took years and years to get there, and then it was ready just in time for the market to kind of hit its skid. Another lesson learned in this instance is the strongest advocate for this project on the county commission is no longer on the county commission. There's been a lot of departures, unfortunately, from the Palm Beach County Commission for various reasons. And so the main advocate for this project isn't there. So it has to find a sponsor, if you will, in a very busy county. Palm Beach County is a very busy county. In Boca Raton, another Tri-Rail station to talk about. This is a station that's just by Yamato Road, just west of I-95. If you know Boca, this is the T-Rex Center. This is about I think there's about 800,000 feet of kind of high-end office and getting into some light manufacturing in this facility. And kind of a very typical suburban office park-dominated corridor, Yamato Road. Carries an unbelievable amount of traffic, and it has a lot of 2- and 3-story buildings that are mostly office buildings. Kind of zooming in on the station, pardon me, this site's actually part of a DRI, and so here's the Boca Tri-Rail station over here again, west of I-95, and Boca's Tri-Rail parking. This vacant land is owned by the RTA, and the RTA for years has said, gosh, you know, this is a perfect TOD opportunity. And this private development was the first new development to come in once the RTA said, well, gosh, we really want to stimulate some TOD kind of stuff here. Unfortunately, this was the development pattern that the developer chose to bring in. So it's got I think there's a Dunkin' Donuts and there's a Verizon shop and some other retail uses set as far back as possible from Yamato Road. Kind of convenient to the Tri-Rail station, but really not, because there's not a clear path to get there. So this is a different instance. In this case, a private developer came in and proposed, gave the RTA an unsolicited proposal, and the RTA has a process for that. For a developer to come in and say, I've got a great idea, I want to build on land you own, I'd like to propose a development concept. So this is an unsolicited proposal that was reviewed by the RTA and the City of Boca. And I apologize, the images are a little grainy. I had to take them from a website, pardon me, but the mass is pretty significant. This is 6 to 8 stories of solid fabric, completely consuming the site with internal parking. I think there were either 1,600 or 1,800 spaces proposed inside this TOD, which is kind of a lot of parking to have in a TOD environment on a fairly busy roadway segment. The scale was just unacceptable to the city, and the terms were unacceptable to the RTA. So the status of this one is that the private proposal was rejected by both the city and the SFRTA, and the Regional Planning Council is now being asked to look at this site and come up with a development program that perhaps is a better complement to the development that exists in the community. And Boca is trying really hard. They're nearly ready to have an MMTD in place, a multimodal transportation district. But this one, unfortunately, I think it was maybe 10 steps forward, which resulted in maybe 11 steps backwards, because now you have to go back and calm people down because the proposal was of a scale that really raised some alarms in the community. And so this one is on hold. And finally, in West Palm Beach, this was actually my first responsibility when I came to the council. In West Palm Beach, there's a downtown property that's immediately adjacent to the Tri-Rail station, and the Tri-Rail station itself, that has been the subject of planning and evaluation for 20 years. I've only been on it for about 6.5 years. And so I know it fairly well. We conducted a full week-long charrette, and all the charrettes, by the way, are multidisciplinary and interagency. So all the agencies participate in all of our planning processes. The RTA, Palm Tran, which runs local bus, the city, the county, certainly the private sector, and all the various public groups. In this instance, the question was, how do you go from this when you get off the Tri-Rail station today? And it's not just Tri-Rail, it's Tri-Rail and Amtrak, and now it is Palm Tran, County Bus, and Greyhound, all coming into the station in this location. So how do you go from this to something perhaps more like this? Gosh, wouldn't that make some sense? City Place, by the way, is 3 blocks away from this location, but you have to walk past sites that look like that one to get there. And in fact, in doing the charrette, we interviewed the owners of a bed and breakfast that have a B&B, the Hibiscus House, about 3 blocks away. And they routinely advertise that folks coming in from Europe can actually come up from Miami International, take Tri-Rail, and then walk to the hotel. It's 3 blocks away. And what happens is they take the train up, and they get off the train, and they say, where the hell am I? This doesn't look anything like the brochure. And they take a cab to go 3 blocks to get to the Hibiscus House, which is a very elegant bed and breakfast. So our existing condition kind of looks like this. The program that was developed is a pretty robust development program. This is the most urban of what we've got in Palm Beach County, and among the most urban along the entire corridor. And in fact, this is the only station on the Tri-Rail corridor that's east of I-95 in a really urban environment. So you actually are able to connect to all the rest of the urban stuff that's in the historic downtown. The program here is 2,000 residential units, 1 million feet of government office space, 250 to 300,000 feet of private office, and about 100,000 feet of retail. Because there's so much retail already, we certainly didn't want to promote a project that would steal from City Place or steal from Clematis Street, which are the city's 2 retail tranches. There's about 1.1 million feet of retail existing. Even though this site with all the residential could add more, to make a more balanced development program, here's what was proposed. So what's happening? Well, there's been 2 things that have been developed in the 6.5 years. One is the county's intermodal center, which has got 18 bus bays for Palm-Tran buses to change, for you to change bus to bus. In the charrette, the proposal was kind of this lollipop shape, that's what we call it. We were able to fit it on this county-owned property, and in fact, here it is constructed and it's operational now. And the other site that's been developed is a new Department of Health building, which had been long proposed in the location, and with some serious negotiations, we were able to help relocate that Department of Health building to a site that was more appropriate, not right in front of the train station where the Department of Health would be closed nights and weekends, but instead a little further back in the TOD. Most recently, over the past, so we finished the shred 6.5 years ago. There has been 6.5 years of negotiations amongst the property owners. The property owners are the state of Florida, Palm Beach County, the Department of Health, the Healthcare District, all public agencies, and the City of West Palm Beach. The City of West Palm Beach is perhaps the most motivated, but the city owns the very smallest piece. The biggest blocks are owned by Palm Beach County. Again, there's not a natural profit motivation for the county. And so the project has stalled yet again. The county was able to issue an RFP to bring in to advertise the site to interested developers about 2 years ago. Those dialogues began. The RFP was published a year ago. Developer was selected maybe 6 months ago. There was one proposer, and you can see the date, April 2010. Pardon me. The county has still not selected the developer to move forward to begin negotiations. There was one respondent, and the developer still hasn't been selected to move forward to negotiations. So it's a little frustrating. The strongest leaders for this project on the county commission rather, are there no longer. Again, we've had some unfortunate departures from the county commission, and so the project doesn't have a champion, and there's a lot of conflict at the staff level because engineers in the county, roadway department essentially, really are cautious about the idea of a large TOD coming in absorbing roadway capacity. It's in a TCEA. There's a downtown master plan. There's a DRI that's been approved. Actually, concurrency doesn't apply, but that doesn't matter. So the county is stalled in allowing the project to move forward to negotiations. So the summary on this one is this was a public planning charrette facilitated by the Regional Planning Council. A private respondent has responded to the county-issued RFP, but is still awaiting selection. And talks continue between the city and county and the city and state because there's a great deal of caution in letting that land go. There's no return that gets published at the end of the year on that holding. Lessons learned, just in quick summary, if you think it'll take a long time, it'll actually take longer. Pardon me. The best laid plans can't anticipate the unexpected. Turnover amongst elected officials, turnover at a staff level where all that institutional knowledge lives. What an unfortunate time for us. I mean, all this great planning has been taking place for 2 years, and with the layoffs and early retirements, a lot of that knowledge is gone now. And so there's a lot of junior folks that are left that weren't involved in the process, and new folks that'll come in that they don't have all the stripes from working through 25 workshops trying to figure out the development program. And the other thing, of course, is market fluctuations. You know, you can't anticipate that the market's going to take the skid that it's taken. And capital markets will open up. Again, I'm an eternal optimist. I have to be. But even though these plans are now really well positioned, there's going to be a learning curve to get them positioned really to be released for development because again, the turnover of elected officials and the turnover at the staff level. And finally, the focus, I would suggest, for TOD planning needs to be really long-term. Phil mentioned the SRPP looks at a 10-year window. Really, it's a 20-year window, I would suggest to you. And that's the case nationally when you look at what other regions do, because you have to be able to anticipate what you want and really hopefully prevent the bad stuff. The discount auto parts coming in next to the station, what an unfortunate occurrence that is, because then it's a 20-year capital investment that you have to either, to capitalize and get that out again, and the costs just get to be tremendous. So preventing the bad stuff and then setting up for the good stuff. So with that, I'll be available for questions later, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Delaney. A few interesting observations. It's the comments about I-95 and this being in the shadow of I-95, and when you look back at the beginning of Tri-Rail, it was a construction mitigation project, really. How do you move people through that corridor while I-95 is being reconstructed? And they didn't have the opportunity to do a lot of the work pre-commuter rail that Commissioner DeLaury and Mr. DeLaury had been talking about. So, I think we've had the opportunity to put some of that groundwork together, which is really great. Then the other thing that struck me was how much of my personal experience winds up helping fix the ails that the interstate system has created. The interstate was one of the great construction projects and engineering feats, of the modern day, but nobody ever talks about, wow, I live near this really cool interchange. But what people do talk about when you go around the country is, I live in a great neighborhood. And when you ask them about their neighborhood, it's about, because I can get where I want to go. I can walk to a bus stop. I can walk to a train station or a light rail station. And that's really what we're creating here. And in addition to the, when you think about assembling the land and preparing it so that the development can occur, the other thing that's really important, and it's important on a day-to-day basis, is how do I get from point A to point B? How do I access that? And Eric, Mr. Hill from Metroplan is really working on that and helping coordinate that across our region. And he's going to share some of those experiences of how we're knitting this together right now.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Wake everyone up here. I want to first thank Commissioner DeLaury and Mayor Miller. Both of them are represented on the Metroplan Orlando Board and the Municipal Advisory Committee. And a lot of the work that they've done have helped us to move forward with what we're doing right now, which is Connections 2013. And this is how we are going to add value to the investments that we're making in land use around TOD. Now, let me first start by saying that I'm jacked up too. And here's a real fast story for you. 25 years ago, and I see friendly faces in the audience, so you've heard this story. But 25 years ago when I was in graduate school, I did my thesis on high-speed rail development here in the United States. And at that time, Florida was ahead of everyone else in the country in developing high-speed rail. So I decided then, I'm not from Florida, but I decided then that I was going to make Florida my home because I wanted to be part of this. Well, 25 years later, I'm in Florida, and it's not very long before we start having high-speed rail. Now, fast forward, something that's more real is the SunRail project. That is happening. That is moving forward. So you don't have to wait 25 years like I did to see the rail project come along. So let's celebrate that. Metroplan Orlando is the regional metropolitan planning organization. We're responsible for planning the transportation network with a 20-year horizon. Our executive director, Harry Barley, likes to say that we are the keepers of the vision. And the vision is becoming reality. But Connections 2013 is a project that we have established that looks at the roles and the responsibilities of not only Metroplan Orlando, but our partners in making our rail or transit investments a reality. There are 16 components, but I won't go through each one this morning. But part of what we're doing here is to look at these items: livability, sustainability, and the Environmental Protection Agency is going to be coming out with new standards at the end of October. And that's going to drive a lot of what we do with transportation investments as well as land use. But I think the real project here for us all to put our arms and minds around is the SunRail project. Again, this is going to start service in the year 2013. It's a two-phase project. The first phase of the project will have service from DeBerry down to Sand Lake Road. And then in 2015, we will have service from the land to DeBerry and from Sand Lake down to Ponciana. Now, a lot of components have to be in place to make SunRail work. SunRail Transit is one of the important tenets of transit-oriented development. So what are some of those components that we are going to be refining to make this successful? Station transit-oriented development, a lot of discussion already on this. The next item is transit emphasis corridors. What we're doing right now, working with Lynx, our partner, is looking at corridors, and Commissioner Delary already pointed out one, the 1792 corridor, where development is going to occur. And as they become more dense, how are we going to, or what do we need to put in those corridors to sustain it? And we're looking at various technologies, streetcar, bus rapid transit. A new phrase that's come about is called fast bus. Again, it's all about rapid transit to support those densities. Our partners Link and Votran in Volusia County are going to be modifying their fixed bus routes. These routes will now become feeders into the transit stations. Again, this is all helping develop and add value to transit-oriented development. We're going to complement that with privately operated feeder services. There are several examples. UCF is a campus that's not going to be close to a SunRail station, but there are opportunities to work with the private industry, the private bus companies, to provide shuttle services from those locations to the SunRail stations. Now, in many other areas around the country, there are transportation management associations that have been established, and what they do, they broker the relationship between the private sector, the public sector, to develop ways to work with employers, to advocate for the use of transit, to advocate for carpooling, van pooling, and to advocate for teleworking. Many times the best trip taken is the one that's not taken. Some other components here, auto facilities at rail stations. Security at the rail stations is something that's vital. When you look at surveys of why people don't use transit, one of them is safety and security. So while people are parking at the stations, there needs to be some security, some safety. A lot of these stations are in locations where no one went or people had no reason to go to. So the street networks are going to have to change to support that. Again, I'm not from the state of Florida. I grew up in an area where there was a lot of transit. And I can remember when I would make my commute trips, I would have to go and pay for parking. Sometimes there wouldn't be enough parking. So I would have to park on the street. And that created some impacts within the neighborhoods. So the neighborhoods are going to have to be part of this as well. Pedestrian access to rail stations. Again, we want to move away from an auto-dependent society here. We want to support other means of transportation for commute trips. And so we're going to be working with our local jurisdictions, our partners, so that we can enhance our pedestrian access to rail stations, but the sidewalk system. We're working with them to look at gaps that are now existing in those connections so that we can fill them in so that it becomes pedestrian friendly. And the same thing we're doing with bicycle access to rail stations. So Metro Plan Orlando is working with our partners to bring all these connections together, again, to add value to transit-oriented development, but add value in supporting our rail system. Now, earlier this week, and this has been a week of enlightenment for me, earlier this week I started at a conference. It's the statewide Housing Coalition Conference, where I gave a same type of discussion, talking about how transportation supports housing. And I heard a lot about transit-oriented development. This group is learning about transit-oriented development. They understand that the housing market now can no longer support suburban development, that now it's more urban development. So they are promoting, advocating for more density in our cities and creating more balance between housing and jobs. And they see transportation as a vital link. They're supporting what they're calling workforce housing in many of these areas. And I was happy to hear Commissioner Delary talk about CRAs around these stations, because that is what they are hoping to have in many of these urban communities. So that is, I believe, hopefully my 5 minutes of fame. So I'll be around for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. It's interesting when you use the term, moving away from an auto-dominated society. We have to remember we need to not project what we're thinking or what we're used to or what we've done for the last 20 or 30 years, but we really need to be thinking about, where are the investment decisions of the next generation going to be, and what are they valuing? And that is where all of the research and all of, the successful TODs, that's where you see the migration to. And we need to keep that in mind and not kind of shake our head and say, oh, auto-dependent society will always be because that's what I've always done. And that's our challenge. And it's been interesting as we've been getting together and getting ready for today, and you listen to Mr. Hill really talking about those intimate connections. And like you said, you're awakening earlier this week at your conference regarding workforce housing, and it's putting these pieces together, and that's what's been exciting, finding how much groundwork's already been done. Now let's bring it down to one location, into Lake Mary. This morning we have Dr. Miller here to talk about that, and it was funny. I mean, the first bit of energy when I walked in this morning was when I started speaking to Dr. Miller, and it's been carrying through. So I can't wait to have you talk about what's going on in Lake Mary.
Well, Mike, thank you so very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. And I have to tell you right now that this is a remarkable story, and I think it's so appropriate that we heard from our 4 previous presenters, because all, in a unique way, have contributed to the brief story that I'm going to tell this morning. And this proposed site for the commuter rail. In Lake Mary, we're very fortunate in that on the west side of our community, we have the International Parkway I-4 corridor, and to the east, we have Seminole State College with its partnership with the University of Central Florida, and we felt that we were very well positioned to take the next steps. But before I do that, let me just show you how things have changed in the last decade. In the year 2001, the City Commission approved what was called their Downtown Master Plan. And if I may, for just a moment, let you know that the eastern boundary right here, this is the rail station, and the eastern boundary of our Downtown Master Plan did not take that into consideration. One of the things that we know today is the game has dramatically changed. What Lake Mary enjoys today, we could not enjoy what we have today if it had not been for our significant partnership with the County Commission, Seminole County Commission, and Chairman Delary has been a dear friend in that process. And I'll give you an example of how we were able to do things in Lake Mary. When we widened a road, rather than to widen the road and put in the requisite sidewalks, we partnered with the county, we partnered with the state, we partnered with the federal government to go ahead and put in a trail system to connect not just Seminole County, but other parts of the state, an amenity to our community. As we were allowed to develop the I-4 corridor, we took some of those revenue streams and buffered our residential communities to kind of create what we had there. I will tell you, at the time that I served in the 90s, I served on the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, and one of the things at that time that I enjoyed were some of the public policy discussions and in some cases debates about what type of development would take place. It's a very different scenario today. Dr. Delaney, I thought, did a wonderful overview, and one of the things that we know right now as we go forward in this process is that Tri-Rail is probably a Harvard case study in how not to do certain things. And I will tell you right now that Mr. Eric Hill represented MetroPlan. In the 90s, we had an opportunity in the development of significant development for Seminole County, City of Lake Mary, and frankly, for the Central Florida region. We ran into an obstacle as we were trying to build a bridge over I-4 and connect the community. It was known as the 46A bridge. At that time, Department of Transportation, some in there referred to it as a developer's bridge and actually opposed it. Fortunately, Metro Plan elected officials, the governor's office, and Congressman Micah, we prevailed. And right now, what you see in the Heathrow International Parkway Colonial Town Park development is a direct result of that. A tremendous gain, not just to Seminole County and Lake Mary, but Florida Trend Magazine featured it as one of their lead articles. But anyway, in 2001, this is what the commission did. Now recognizing that the game has changed, and because of the proposed commuter rail station, earlier this year, the city of Lake Mary modified or revised its downtown master plan, and what we did is we took in this area east of the railroad tracks, and to give you an orientation, here is Lake Mary Boulevard, here's City Hall Central Park, and Seminole State College is right there. One of the things that we did in anticipation of what may take place at the ballot box in November, we went to our community and we asked them, would you allow us to administratively change your land use? And Commissioner DeLaury attended that community forum. We had overwhelming support. And at that time, we changed our downtown, if you will, our downtown development area from 73 acres to 123 acres. And what we were also able to do at that time is to take about 85% of this new area and convert it in land use to our downtown development district. One of the things that we did is we contracted with ACI out of Winter Park to come up with various TOD master plans. And this is one of the ones that we were very pleased with right now, because what we have done in Lake Mary is we have set the regulatory table to go ahead in anticipation of what we want to happen. And right now, as you can see, this master plan right here with an amphitheater to the east, notice what Kim talked about in terms of what we want. Lake Mary is very fortunate in that we have a series of staircase parks that transcend to this area right here. So we've got opportunities just not for retention, but also for recreational development, and we've already done those necessary steps. So as you look at this proposed site right here, I want you to keep in mind now this corner right here, and then look at this. And what we'll do right now is we'll talk about what we've been able to do with our county partners and modifying that site to go ahead and change the land use designation. You see covered parking, these types of things, multi-use. We'll come back to this in just a moment. But right here in this area right now, the city of Lake Mary has committed over $21 million in infrastructure improvements. We have buildings, we also have acquired land. And one of the things that we know right now is that government is simply going to have to do more, and we're going to have to reach out to our business partners. We're going to have to reach out to the business developers and also the investment community. We have a number of assets right here in terms of land, building, and infrastructure in place. And what we're doing right now is we're reaching out and we're willing to look at most anything. One of the things that we know right now is the way that we have done business in the past simply will not work. The sign that we're open for business is not going to get the job done in today's marketplace. So we feel that we've got a number of assets. We will look at joint ventures, we'll look at significant public-private partnerships, and we will utilize our land, our buildings, and our other assets in a true partnership endeavor. One of the things that we've done right here, we know right now, if you look at some of the chamber work, what is it that businesses are going to look at when they come to a community? And the first thing is, under the area of education, they're going to look at that talent supply chain. And in Lake Mary, we're very fortunate right now. We've got one of the best public school districts in the entire country. We've got Seminole State as an emerging institution and its partnership with the University of Central Florida in a new $32 million joint use or partnership center. We have, within a matter of blocks from this designated area, just about any educational opportunity you could want. Also, people are going to look at quality of life issues, and if you can see right here, all this is a conceptual rendering of what may be, coupled with what we already have in place with our very successful farmers market and also our jazz and arts in the Central Park area. Also, they're going to look at quality of life, think about culture, think about green space, and you saw what we've conceptualized with Seminole State. There's discussion of a new fine arts center there, and already their annual cultural arts program is exceptional. You need to look at infrastructure. We've addressed that. The business competitiveness, we have simply said that we'll set the regulatory table for those that want to partner with the city to be successful, and also in terms of economic development. Fortunately, Lake Mary has a track record, and we feel that we can capitalize on that. Right now, in this proposed rail station, the city has already approved a conditional use for 22,000 square foot, basically, if you will, the Mencken building. This will be a train station. More in line, my wife and family and I just recently returned from Europe, and in that typical train station, you can walk in there and get most anything that you need, grab it, walk out on the platform, step onto the train, and go to your destination. That is exactly what is taking place because Mr. Mencken's building, and again, if you'll notice, it's adjacent to the police station. His building actually aligns with the platform, and what we're doing is taking this to the next step. Some of the proposed renderings for the SunRail stations probably leave some room for improvement, and we've anticipated this. Now, is this a dream? What is going to happen? Well, right now, we already have approved the Manji Professional Office Building, and if you remember in the proposed site in that far left-hand corner, this building has already been proposed. We're going to have vertical development coming out of ground in anticipation of what we feel this is going to bring to our community. Also, what they're doing is they're proposing a pedestrian gateway feature from this part of town, this building, right up to the train station, and again, very green. One of the things that we talk about right now in terms of the vision, we absolutely believe that if we set the regulatory table, create the environment for people to want to be there, and guarantee that the city will partner with them for their success, we can create something that others want to be. I have a young child here looking at what our community will be for the simple reason that, as Dr. Delaney said, we're building this for the next generation. 2 days ago, I had two seniors from the University of Central Florida, both involved in student government, in my office, showing them, asking them for reactions, and they said, "Wow, Mayor, that looks like a really cool place to live," and that's exactly what we want to create. So we feel that right now that although we're looking to the future, we still have sustained development on the 4th Street, Lakeview Avenue, a gateway feature to city. This is adjacent to City Hall. We have the Shaw properties. We had 2 ribbon cuttings within just the last week. And what we'll do is we'll continue to work with the community as it is now, anticipating the future. But one of the things that we have said right now, and I think Dr. Delaney said, we know that it is a new day, it's a new way of doing business. We know it is not going to happen overnight, and we know it's going to take a sustained effort. But what we believe we've done is we've set a conceptual plan in place, we've taken the necessary steps. And if we do this the right way, and we have every reason to believe with our successful partnership with the county and others, we are going to be able to create the community that allows us to sustain the reputation that we have. And fortunately, CNN Monday Magazine has consistently ranked Lake Mary as the #1 place to live in Florida for communities under 50,000 population. Everything that we do, every activity that we take, is done so that we will sustain that reputation and create an environment where others want to live. When I first ran for the Lake Mary City Commission in 1988, I was interviewed by the Orlando Sentinel, and I said, "Sir, what is the one thing that you want to do if elected?" I said, "The one thing that I want to do if elected is to help set a standard so that when my daughter, who at that time was 4 years of age, when she's an adult, will want to come to our community and live." My daughter just completed her first year of law practice and does live in our community. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. As almost each of our panelists have mentioned, you know, in these economic times, in this challenging economy, or where investment decisions are going to be made. All of my conversations, and I know a lot of people in our company and colleagues, the conversations with the investment market and with some of the developers that are here today, are saying everything is going to be returning to what is at that core of importance, which is location, location, location. And that's what we're talking about today, is creating those locations, and with a lot of the hard work that's already been done, so that you can, Commissioner Delory and I were talking the other day, almost have a push-button action to make these things happen. So, like I said, there's some exciting times, and the story and the excitement about Lake Mary Station can be replicated if we were to talk about each of the stations up and down the SunRail line. And again, this is just the beginning of a broader network that will be coming in place and that we have some down payments on now, and now starting to move into the continuing growth of that network of transit, which will help each one of these nodes, each one of these stations, to be considered an even better spot for location to ring true. Mr. Hill, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what's being looked at for, when someone gets on at these outlying stations and you come into downtown Orlando with the expansion of the limo project. And could you just talk a little bit about, what's happening there and the status of that, so that we have even better distribution when someone steps off in downtown Orlando?
Okay, with the limo project, they are currently doing a study to look at expanding the limo system, going east-west over to Paramore area and then back over to the Thornton Park area. And then they're looking at extending it north to Florida Hospital and then down to the other hospital to the south. That is currently in study phase. I truly believe, again, that this is a transit project or study that will come to fruition. And if I could just share with you two experiences I had in two other cities, Indianapolis and in Cleveland. And Cleveland is a city that is really struggling. However, I found that they had similar scenarios in both cities, where they had hospitals, two hospitals in two areas of the city that were partnering to develop and implement a fixed guideway system. In Indianapolis, it's a people mover that connects the two hospitals with the law school, and it's free. And the service is a partnership with the hospitals. In Cleveland, they have what's called the Health Line. The two hospitals in Cleveland pay for the naming right of that line, and it's a BRT system. Now, I think that's a wonderful model for us to consider in this area. And as I said, this is a study. It's a study phase right now, but I think towards the end, we should probably look at that private-public partnership and developing a system similar to that.
The Health Line, for some people who might be familiar with what had long been called the Euclid-Carter BRT, is now the Health Line, and the level of investment along that corridor has been significant and fascinating to watch. Commissioner DeLauria, I know you've spent a lot of time kind of traveling the country through looking at what kind of lessons to bring here, and I'd ask you, what are some of the highlights that you consider that you're trying to bring forward here and that you've seen across the country?
Interesting question. There's nothing that's not impossible. With stretching out to other municipalities. And I think the thing that really holds to me is when you look at Nashville, San Diego, Denver, a couple of cities I've been to, specifically looking at this. One of the things that I like that they did was consolidating government. And I know a lot of people don't want to talk about it. I know especially small cities and some counties don't want to talk about it, but consolidation is the way to go. There's a lot of bang for the buck there, a lot of duplication of services. I think the big issue with consolidation is that too many elected officials don't want to give up their positions. That's the bottom line. I think if you're going to move forward, and I really think our planning is not for the next generation. I think our planning is for 2 or 3 generations down. I think if you're going to look at the next generation, you're shortchanging yourself. Those are the big things that I've been seeing in and around the U.S.
Mr. Laurie, on a similar vein, when you think about what we need to do here and what kind of obstacles we're going to need to overcome, starting from here but working across the general populace, what are some of those challenges you see confronting us, but what are the exciting opportunities that overcoming those challenges create?
We've got a lot of education to do. We have to start with the folks who are doing the planning, and so one of the challenges has been, as we did the regional policy plan, we started talking about transit-oriented development, was educating planners, some of the staff planners, and this is new. We haven't had anything contextually in Central Florida like this, so have to educate the planners, have to educate the public officials, got to educate the folks who are in the development community. Had an interesting a discussion a couple of years ago. I was talking to the Home Builders Association in Orlando, and we were already setting the table for those folks at the time that transit-oriented development is the new market. We have enough suburban development probably to last us for many, many years here with all of the glut of housing that we have. And one fellow raised his hand up and he said, you know, intuitively I know that you're right. He said, I've been building basically the same box for 30 years. Can't I just keep building that same box? I said, well, of course. I don't have any power to stop you. If you think you can find a market, if you think you can get financing for your buyers, and if you think your buyers can get transportation access to the job markets from the suburban far-flung locations that you're building in. So if you can answer all those questions positively, I mean, sure, go ahead, keep on building what you're doing. But I think what we intuitively know is that when the market comes back, it's going to be a different market. And part of the difference is hopefully going to be the transit-oriented development market. I think for the planners in the audience, you need to be able to get to the point that Lake Mary has gotten to and that Seminole County has gotten to, and that some of the other stops that we've inventoried have gotten to. And that is, you really should be doing comprehensive plan amendments in advance to make this land ready for higher intensities, higher flow area ratios, mixed uses required. You need to be looking at reducing your off-street parking requirements to make it more pedestrian friendly and more transit friendly. And you also need to be doing transit-oriented development overlays so that it takes the fear out of the developer's mind that this land is already ready for me when I'm ready, as Bob said, to pull the trigger on it. And I'll use the example in Charlotte. You know, $2 billion worth of private real estate development money within 5 years, within walking distance of their 16 transit stops on just 11 miles of the Lynx Blue Line, light rail. So that's light rail, we're commuter rail, a little bit different, but $2 billion worth of real estate development on just 265 acres. We've got plenty of land surrounding these rail stops to incorporate transit-oriented development. But part of the reason for the rapidity and the success in Charlotte was it was all pre-planned, it was all pre-zoned, and it became just an administrative development plan review. So if the developer wanted to invest, he knew that basically if he could meet their standards and get through his design review, he was going to be guaranteed approval. It's very important, and local planners need to pave that way so the developers can have that kind of access.
That pre-planning is critical, and the other thing I would add with Charlotte, and that we're starting to see here, is the commitment and belief that there is a network going in. So when I get on at this station, I have options, and then that's what we're seeing now with SunRail, and as we look at the investment in high-speed rail, the expansion of limo downtown, the next commuter rail line as we think about going out on the Orange Blossom Express, or the light rail that we're considering as a region down from I-Drive to the airport through Lake Nona, Medical City, and then connecting into northeast Osceola County or up to UCF. Continuing that network so that every one of those nodes is value and has the opportunity to move around the system, and a lot of that pre-planning and a lot of thoughtful investment going in up front. I'd like to open up questions to anyone in the audience.
What's the most important component that you all see to boost the ridership, secure the ridership, and make TOD successful?
I mean, I really do think that to build ridership, you've got to shift from the current land uses that are in the walking distance of the station areas to transit-oriented development. But it's not just going to be the SunRail station areas. There are other feeder corridors that are going to be very critical. The 1792 corridor is this 13-mile continuous CRA. It's already ripe for that. It's already pre-planned for that. So maybe that corridor will be, let's say it's a streetcar, or maybe potentially even light rail. I mean, I think it's going to have to be carefully planned so that it doesn't compete with SunRail. But starting at the south end of the county, feeding to the Maitland stop is a natural. So that first mile from Fern Park corridor, which is all an unincorporated county, and the county is properly planned for it. There's adequate acres there and some really nice lakefront potential land assemblies for redevelopment, so that you can start with that first mile, do a streetcar. You can begin with bus, obviously, but you can maybe transition to streetcar and feed the Maitland SunRail stop, and then build as you go north. So the lateral corridors are very important too. The 434, 436 corridors got to connect up the Longwood stops to where there's other density and intensity. So we really do need to plan for the transit-oriented development, not only around the station areas, but in the feeder corridors that get people to them. That'll build the ridership. I think it's very important that you got to be able to step out of your mixed-use building and step into your connection. So whether it be bus or streetcar, to take you to the major feeder line with SunRail and eventually the high-speed rail. When we get that connectivity, people will start seeing, I can live in an urban environment with mixed-use amenities. I can live and work and shop along these corridors. They're going to be powerful attractors. And I think that's the shift that we have to get to.
I just want to add to Phil's comments. I mentioned that we want to look at transportation management associations here as a way to complement the fixed route bus service. Within this area, we had 3 transportation management associations, and they've all disbanded. Transportation management associations advocate alternative modes of transportation other than your car. Well, we didn't have a product to provide people with an alternative, but now we do. That's one way. Beyond the education, beyond providing some incentives, making transit competitive with using the automobile, there are some opportunities for us to develop some of these transit stations into destinations. I recently spent time in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure many of you have traveled to Washington, D.C. When you go into Union Station, you see the crowd of people that are there. That's a destination for them, not just to take a train, but as a place to be. And I think with Link Central Station, Sand Lake Road Station, I think is another opportunity for us to create these locations as places for people to go, not just to use transit, but just to be there.
Thank you. Sure.
Kathy, I think one of the first steps to get SunRail successful is to make the connection of SunRail to the community more palatable. And I think the first spoke in the wheel is going to have to be Links. And what Links is trying to do right now, and we're actually doing a couple of pilot programs with them, is a pickup line where you can actually call it for your home 2 hours before, and they'll pick you up from one location, drop you off at the next location, door to door. And you can reserve that ahead of time. They're looking at incorporating some of that into the connections to SunRail. And I think it's how we make that first experience in SunRail that's going to make or break the system, so to speak. You know, there's an old adage that you can only have one first impression, and I think it's that first impression. You know, is it going to be the thing that's going to be the win-win? How are we going to work out the kinks so people are going to come back the next day or the next week, the next month? And I think that's going to be the key. And I can tell you that I don't sit on Links Board, but I know that Commissioner Henley does, as well as other people, and they are constantly discussing it now.
With that, I'd like to very much appreciate our Augusta panel for joining us today and give them a round of applause.
This program is made possible by funding from the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, where government leaders, business executives, and academic experts come together to discuss major issues facing the state of Florida.